For the most part, we've all been taught, or at least heard, the same story. Egypt as we know it is about 5,000 years old. The pyramids and the Sphinx are a few hundred years younger, and nothing seriously challenging those claims would ever be kept from us. But what if I was to tell you that only one of those things was true? I'm Evan Flay, and this is Fire and Stone. Now, if we're going to have a discussion about things that may be seen as alternative views, it's important for us to first have a clear understanding of what the mainstream narrative actually is. So for context, in mainstream archaeology, ancient Egypt officially began right around 3100 BC in what's known as the early dynastic period. This was the time where Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt came together and were unified under a single king, usually referred to as Narmer. Now, and this is also around the time where Egypt began to resemble kind of more of a centralized state with things like writing and administration and, I guess, a more royal ideology. Now, the Egypt that we all love to think about, things like pyramids and pharaohs and massive stone architecture, that came a little bit later in the Old Kingdom, which started right around 2700 BC. Now, the Great Pyramid was said to have been constructed between 2680 and 2660 BC for the pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty. And the Sphinx, well, that came a little bit earlier. That was said to have been carved around 2500 BC for the pharaoh Khafra, and was said to have been carved in his likeness, both his facial features and due to its symbolic placement within his pyramid complex. Now, I'm guilty of this too, but it's very easy to reduce Egypt, and Giza in particular, down to just those two things, the pyramids and the Sphinx. It's all everyone seems to talk about. But that really oversimplifies what this place actually was. Giza was an entire integrated complex. I mean, you had things like the Queen's pyramids and the mastaba fields, the mortuary temples, Khufu's solar boat pits, just to name a few. And they were all designed to work together. I mean, in its prime, it had to have been one of the most awe-inspiring and carefully planned cities in human history. And that's precisely why this next question matters so much. Just how old is Egypt really? Now, over the last 20 to 30 years, especially with the rise of things like the internet and social media, the idea, the notion that Egypt is older than we're being told has gained a lot of traction. But unfortunately, that conversation is usually framed in a very specific way. On one side, you have academics. On the other side, you have a sea of smaller voices, like mine, who often get dismissed as fringe or speculative or conspiratorial. But that framing is relatively new. Because for the majority of human history, truth was not defined by titles or degrees, but rather by philosophers and historians and priests, people whose ideas were debated and preserved and deeply respected, even when they challenged prevailing views. Today, though, that balance has changed. Experts are often seen as infallible, and anyone challenging them is immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist or someone who wears a tinfoil hat. And yet, when you look back at the whole long arc of human history, something pretty spectacular begins to emerge. And that is, for millennia, the consistent narrative written by the ancients themselves has been that Egypt is far older than we are being told. Not mystical, not supernatural, just much, much older. Any serious discussion about the age of Egypt has to start with Herodotus, the Greek historian often referred to as the father of history. Herodotus didn't rely on rumor. He traveled to Egypt, spoke directly with Egyptian priests, and was shown king lists preserved in their temples. He records that hundreds of generations separated Egypt's earliest rulers from his own time, a span that pushes Egyptian civilization thousands of years deeper than classical Greece. And that assumption wasn't unique to Herodotus. Greek thinkers like Aristotle and Plutarch treated Egyptian knowledge in science and philosophy and religion as something inherited from a very ancient past, not a recent civilization. Now, if Herodotus gives us the reporting, then Plato, the Athenian philosopher and student of Socrates, gives us the numbers. In two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, Plato recounts a story passed down through Solon, the Athenian lawgiver and Plato's great uncle. Solon learned it while traveling in Egypt after speaking with priests at the temple of Sais, who told him that Greek history was young, but Egypt's record stretched at least 9,000 years deeper into the past. But Plato is careful here. He explains where the story comes from, who transmitted it, and why the Egyptians believed their records were more complete than anyone else's. Figures like Pythagoras, who studied in Egypt for years, reflect the same assumption, that Egyptian wisdom comes from a much older source. By Plato's time, the idea that Egypt was unimaginably old wasn't controversial. It was inherited. And that inheritance becomes even more explicit with Diodorus Siculus, a Greek historian writing in the 1st century BC. Drawing on Egyptian priestly records, Diodorus reports that Egyptian civilization extended back tens of thousands of years, long before the earliest Greek histories. He treats this not as myth, but as archival tradition, preserved and guarded by the priesthood. Centuries later, that same view appears outside the Greek world. Al-Masudi, a 10th century Muslim historian, often called the Herodotus of the Islamic world, wrote that Egypt's monuments were built by peoples who lived long before recorded history, and in some cases before the flood itself. And finally, we arrive in the modern era with E.A. Wallace Budge, a British Egyptologist and translator of primary Egyptian texts. Budge repeatedly acknowledged that Egyptian civilization extended far beyond the dynastic record, and that earlier periods were deliberately excluded, not disproven. Across cultures, religions, and thousands of years, the same idea persists. Egypt wasn't just ancient, it was remembered as ancient for a very long time. But then we arrive in the 21st century. Today, the most recognizable face in modern Egyptology is Dr. Zahi Hawass, a man with immense institutional authority, a man whose voice carries real weight over what is and is not allowed to be taken seriously. In 2017, a revolutionary technology, muon tomography based on cosmic ray physics, revealed a previously unknown sealed void above the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid. When asked about it, Hawass's response was immediate. He said, quote, "They found nothing. This paper offers nothing to Egyptology, zero." No curiosity, no hesitation, just dismissal. But as the data held and was confirmed independently, peer-reviewed, and published in Nature, his position shifted. Now it wasn't nothing. It was something, but it means nothing. He said, quote, "The pyramid is full of cavities. That does not mean they harbor secret chambers or that this is a new discovery." And then, when denial became impossible, his whole narrative inverted completely. He said, quote, "The existence of several void spaces inside the pyramid is not a new thing. Egyptologists and scholars knew about it several years ago." So hold on, let's pause for a sec. In the span of months, we went from there's nothing to there's something but it means nothing to we knew about it the whole time. And yet, there was no documentation, no maps, no papers, no press briefings, just authority. At the same time, Dr. Hawass has repeatedly dismissed researchers like Graham Hancock and John Anthony West, Randall Carlson, Jimmy Corsetti, Ben Van Kerkwijk, just to name a few, often labeling them pseudoscientists, just for following the same trail of testimony left by Herodotus and Plato and Aristotle. Which raises a fair question. If questioning the established timeline makes someone a pseudoscientist, if listening to ancient sources is unscientific, if pointing out contradictions is heresy, then let me ask you, Dr. Hawass, would you consider Plato a pseudoscientist? Because if the answer is no, I would like to point something out. In one of Plato's dialogues, Phaedrus, Socrates recounts an Egyptian story, a story he explicitly attributes to Egypt. It's the story of Thoth, the god credited with inventing writing. Thoth presents writing to King Thamus as a great gift, a technology that will preserve knowledge forever. But the king rejects it. He warns that writing will not strengthen memory, it will replace it. That people will stop training their minds, that they will rely on external records, that they will appear wise without truly understanding anything. In his words, it would give people the appearance of wisdom, not the reality, which makes this interesting. Because you see, Dr. Hawass earned his diploma in Egyptology from Cairo University in 1979. Cairo University's mascot is Thoth. Well, if you made it this far, thank you. This is not a one-off. This is absolutely going to be a series. And this was the first video I've ever put up on this channel, and I'm super excited to keep going. And if nothing else, leaving a comment or liking the video or subscribing lets me know that I'm not just screaming into the void, which, given what we just talked about, feels particularly appropriate. In the next episode, though, we're going to be talking about the Great Pyramids. And we're going to return to the question that I posed at the beginning of this video. Age of Egypt, Age of the Pyramids, Age of the Sphinx, and the transparency of mainstream archaeology. What's the only one that's true? We'll start picking that apart next time. I'm Evan, and this is Fire and Stone.